Hey everybody, wanted to do an update video. This one's going to be on 3D printing tips. Say that fast. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do this in the most basic form I know how to talk about it. I'm not going to get real technical, okay? But I have probably over the last 3 years, this has been the biggest subject that I receive emails from people saying, how do I get this to work? Or, gosh, how do you have such success with 3D printing? And the way I got there is just practice, okay? But I have done a lot of testing, okay? So I'm going to jump into this video here. I got a lot of stuff laying around here, so it's kind of a mess, but I hope you enjoy this. So everybody says, Damon, what materials are there that you use the most, okay? Well, when you buy a 3D printer, normally it comes with PLA. And the PLA is a pretty low temperature material that you're using. And I haven't used it for over 2 years. I don't even own any PLA. I don't even have cooling fans on my nozzles anymore because as PLA comes out, there's actually a fan blowing there to help cool it because it's got such a, it melts so easy. One of the biggest problems that I had with PLA is if you're ever going to use it outside in the sun, it will actually get soft enough that it will warp or can actually, well, not melt, but it will collapse. So if you print parts in black PLA and you're going to put them on an RC model out in the sun, they will not work. Because I made an engine hood for my MSL1, the 1919, out of PLA, and after about 2 hours in the sun, it just sunk in and collapsed. So, but the reason most people love PLA is because it's virtually idiot-proof to print. You don't even have to have a heated bed to print it on, okay? The next jump for most people is they either want to go to PETG or they want to go to ABS, okay? The thing with both of those are you do need a heated bed, okay? Some people want to use nylon. You're going to need a lot of heat in your nozzle to do nylon. And I'm going to talk about all those temperatures in a minute. I'm just going over the materials. And then there's flex, which you basically print rubber parts. Depending on how rubbery the filament is, your nozzle might not be able to push it down. The drive motor on your extruder might not be able to push it down because it takes a little bit of force to push it through the nozzle to squirt out. So if it's too rubbery and too flexible, it will move around and you'll see it coming out of the side of your extruder. So you really have to be careful how you set your machine up and the nozzle side and how fast it pushes. You can actually set how fast it will print. So you need to really super experiment if you're going to do flex, okay? And I've done some stuff in flex, but I use the less rubbery flex. It's still bendy, if that's a word, but it's not like rubber because you've just got to have that extruder push it so slow so that it doesn't have force pushed up against it that it makes it not want to go straight down. So now I'm going to talk about the temperatures. When I used to print PLA, you could print it between 180 and 220 Celsius. Now, if you don't know anything about 3D printing, you think, well, that's pretty hot. Well, when I print nylon, I print it at 295. And my extruder head, my hot end will only go to 300 C. So it's maxing out my machine. But when I print ABS, I'm between 220 and 240. And the way you know you're too hot is if it's when it jumps from one part of the print to the other. If you see like a cobweb going over, like a little fine silky hair, you're too hot. So I turn it down in about 5 or 3 Celsius increments. Okay. When I print ASA, I print it between 235 and 250. When I print PETG, I'm between 230 and 260. In those ranges, honestly, the hotter you've got it, the better it's going to bond each layer. Okay, so you want it as hot as you, for me, most of my parts I want to stay together. They're just not going to sit on a desk. They're going to have a vibration or structural component to it. So I want to run it at the hot side. But if I'm doing a really detailed part and I don't want any of those little hairy things show up, I'll run it at the cool side. When I print nylon, I'm between 255 and 275, but I have gone to 295 if I really want the layers to bond. And then the flex, I've done between 245 and 265. Now, the bed temperatures are really, really important. And this is where most people have problems with ABS or PETG. And the bed, the hotter it is, the better your part will stick to it. But you still have to use a glue stick. Now, I fell in love with glue sticks because of all the experimenting I did. If you're only going to print a little bit, some people would use hairspray. I have 28 kilometers I've run through this machine so far, and 24 kilometers of filament through this. So I have 290 continuous days, I think, on this machine, and 212 or something like that on this machine, continuous. Now, that didn't mean I ran them 24/7, but if you added up all the hours they've run, that's how many days it equates to. So I have learned how to 3D print, everybody, and I don't remember the last time I've had a failure 3D printing. But the heat of the bed is extremely important. It's one of the most important things. And your glue sticks. Now, there is a Elmer's glue that has blue, okay? That is the best thing I've ever found. They do have an Elmer's glue that's purple. This is, I don't know what it is. This says it's new and improved and better. It's almost like waxing your bed. Nothing will stick to this glue. I think this glue, when it cures, is almost, when it cures or dries, it's almost like an epoxy. It's smooth. There's no gooiness left to it. This Elmer's will always stay just a little bit. You can feel it. The bed feels like it's rubbery. And that's one reason your filament sticks so good to it. But let's talk about temperatures for a minute. With PLA, beds, you can actually run no heat on PLA, but I set mine between 30 and 60 when I used to be able to do PLA. I've not done PLA in 2 years. ABS, you want that temperature between 80 and 100 Celsius. Okay, and you want to use a glue stick. If you are below 80, you have a really good chance that once you build it up off the bed, it will either start to peel up, curl, or it might just pop loose. When I printed some of my big crankcases for my big radial engines, if you think about it, where these cylinders are, it grows up like almost, if there's 9 cylinders, there's 10 segments. So those little segments are almost like little pyramids coming up first until the whole crankcase is developed. So those, as your extruders go around them, sometimes can move them and they'll fall over. So you got to be, the higher the temperature, the better with ABS. I always keep my beds at 90 on the first 2 layers. If you got a good slicer program, you can set, like on your first 2 layers, what the temperature of the bed is, and then what the next one is. So on my, when I print ABS, I start at 95C for the first 2 layers, and then I go down to 80. I never go below 80. If I have a really big, long part, where I'm going to actually use my enclosure, because ABS will curl a little bit. This enclosure, and I'll talk about it at the end, you do not need the enclosure to print small ABS parts. So that's a myth out there. Everybody says you have to have an enclosure to print ABS. If you're printing little small parts that are like 2 or 3 inches by 3 inches, I've never needed to have this closed. But I'll talk about that. I don't want to get out of order here. So the ABS, I have between 80 and 100. The ASA, I have between an 80 and 100. And I'm going to dive into what these filaments are best for structurally later on, okay? The PETG, I print between 80 and 105. 105 is about the highest I've ever had in my bed. Nylon, I print between 80 and 105. And the flex, I print between 50 and 80. Flex, you got a pretty low temperature. So what I want to talk about is nozzles now. If you can see, I don't know if you can see, this says 6 millimeter, and this says 4 millimeter, and on the back here it says 8 millimeter. I made these so I know what nozzle I've got in my machine. And here's just some tips. If you have a 0.3 is the smallest I use. The beauty of 0.3 is, if I'm doing like a dashboard or an instrument panel on an aircraft, I can get the little bitty nuts and screws to be really, really detailed with a 0.3 millimeter. The thickest you can print a 0.3 though is 0.24. So 80% of your nozzle width is normally the height that you can print in your layer. But any little dirt that gets on your filament will clog that 0.3. I would say that, and I haven't used my 0.3 in a couple of years. Well, no, I probably use it some, but I make sure my filament's really clean. But that's where I had the most failures in printing, was the nozzle clogging. So what I do is I take foam rubber, cut a little slit in it. I put it on my filament here, and any dust that's riding down on it gets stopped. I also have that foam up here too, and I don't know if you can see it, but I only print with big reels, these 3 kilogram reels. But ABS, for some reason, I'm knocking stuff down. ABS seems like it really attracts dust. There must be some static thing, and I should have looked it up. But ABS really likes to attract dust. So these foam things I've got really keeps my nozzles from getting clogged. But 0.3 is really susceptible to clogging. 0.4 I use probably 25% of the time for detail, and you can go 0.32 thickness. 0.6 I use a lot because I'm moving a lot of filament. I can set my layers at 0.48, and I can build up a part really quick. Keep in mind, the thicker the layer, the less detail and the rougher it's going to look. Okay, I'm going to do a future video on the acetone vapor bath system where I smooth things. But there's a lot of danger in that. You can burn your house to the ground, so I'm not going to even really get into acetone vapor bath in this video. And then 0.8 is the biggest nozzle I have, and you can go 0.64, but that's like squirting toothpaste out. I mean, it's got to be a big part, and you can really move a lot of filament with that 0.8. So I have those 4 are my favorite. I think they actually have a 1 millimeter, but I've never used it, and I'm not even sure if that would work on my machines. So the glues, like I said, are hairsprays. The blue is great, the purple is bad as far as these 2 Elmers. One thing I did modify on these are original Prusa i3 Mark II, and this is a Mark IIS. No, I'm sorry, this is the Mark II, and this is the Mark IIS. A little bit different bearing setup, I think. But on all the new Prusas, they've got this spring steel thing that pops up, and it has the PEI Ultimate on it, which is a plastic that's really good for pulling your parts off of. So I bought spring steel from McMaster-Carr, and it was a bitch to cut on my big metal bandsaw. This spring steel is like cutting diamonds. There's a material 3M makes called the 466 MP. This is a double-sided tape that's like epoxy. So you put that on, be really careful, put on your PEI, and you hold this on with clips, or you can do like me, put some rare earth magnets under it, and it helps it stay down. But it's awesome for popping your parts off. If you buy the new Prusa Mark IIIs, this comes as standard, but I loved it so much I converted mine to it. I think they do make upgrade kits for the Mark IIs to do this, but I just went to McMaster-Carr and made my own. Okay, the enclosure. Why do I have an enclosure? I print massive ABS parts. ABS I use 90% of the time. The only time I use a PETG or a nylon is when I want the maximum strength structurally out of a material. Okay, but ABS is, I would say everything I've got in here is 85 to 90% ABS. But if you're printing a really long, tall part, the bigger the volume of ABS, the more it wants to cool unevenly. So it starts to peel up the corners. Okay? If you're printing like a round cylinder here, chances are once you get an inch up off of it, you would see one of the corners start to peel up as it cools. So if you're printing a massive ABS part, you want your bed to be at 100C. I pull this up that I made. I hold it on with a couple of springs. It's pretty much airtight, and it will get up to 145 Celsius in here just from the heat of the printers. Now, print your small parts first to preheat this, and then put your big part in there, because it does take about 45 minutes to an hour of printing for the heated beds to get this up to 145 degrees. But I have found out at 145 degrees, my parts don't lift. Okay, now that's nowhere near what the ABS melting point is. Okay, but it seems like it's enough that it doesn't curl on me. So when I print the large, I did kind of a top secret project where I had large pieces of a Merlin 12-cylinder crankcase. And they wanted to really curl up on me. And by getting this up to 145 degrees, it quit curling, and I never had any problems. So I'm going to now dive into testing. So I'm going to sound a little bit like an a-hole here, okay? And if you followed my videos for very long, you know that I have a deep passion for facts and what works and what doesn't work. And I have I have a very small, how do I put it? I'm just not tolerant of idiots. And I hate to name call people, but there's just some people on the internet that sits behind their keyboard and throws out stupidity. And I'm talking people that are truly intellectually, how do I say this? They're just not all there. Okay, there's just something wrong with them. But when I first started doing my testing, I had a couple of people on the internet basically say, you don't know what you're talking about. So, you know, of course, what do? I do testing, and I find out for myself what the answer is. So this is called ASA. The reason ASA it became such a big thing out there is this is designed to be UV protected. The sun will not affect it. Okay? This is clear PETG. This is ABS. And this is actually nylon impregnated with carbon fiber. So, I only print in ABS. And I have a couple of these know-it-all, you know, intellectually challenged jerks say, you don't know what you're doing. You're a poser, a loser. ABS is not made for the sun, only ASA. You're misleading people when you say you use ABS. So what did I do? I printed all 4 of these and let them sit outside of my backyard for 1 year in all elements. The sun, the rain, the winter, the freezing, the sun. And guess what I figured out? That in 1 year, my ABS did not show any visible deterioration. Well, I shared this with one of my scientist friends, and he says, hey, Damon, here's a fact. The ASA will probably last about 225 years in the sun, and the ABS will only last about 30 years in the sun. Well, us model aircraft people aren't going to have airplanes that sit continuously in the sun for 30 years before the ABS deteriorates and turns into dust. Now, granted, you might set it in the sun for 5 years and it starts to get a powdery coating on it, or you can see that it's actually starting to deteriorate. But we don't have our model airplanes in the sun that long, so, you know, ABS is going to be just fine, people, at least my testing. Now, here's another myth. Carbon fiber. And I got to be honest, I was completely wrong when I first started buying it. The first testing I did with carbon fiber, I found it was stronger, but I was doing it in compression. And I'm not sure how to really get, hopefully you'll understand my example here. If you took concrete and mixed little bitty balls of styrofoam in it, it's going to weaken the concrete because you have removed the ability to hold itself together. The cool thing about putting carbon fiber in our filament is the look, and it becomes really light. Not really light, 20% or 15% lighter. But everybody thinks because it's carbon fiber, it's stronger, right? It's like saying putting a turbocharge. You know, if you've got an egg beater, or you've got a mixer in your house, or you've got a lawnmower and you put a turbo on it, it's supposed to be better, right? Well, actually, the ABS weakens your part. I mean, the carbon fiber will weaken your part as far as putting a torque on it or pulling it in tension. Because those little bitty fine filaments of carbon fiber become a filler in there. And the less ABS you got connecting itself together, the less nylon, any material you got, the very fine powdery chips of carbon fiber make it weaker. Now keep in mind that carbon fiber is going to be so fine that it will print through a 0.3 millimeter nozzle without clogging. So there's not any big chunks of carbon fiber in it. So I love the carbon fiber for the look, and I love it for making it lighter, but it absolutely weakens it, probably by as much as 40 to 50%. Okay? Now, if we want to talk about true strengths, everything I've tested so far is nylon's been the strongest for me. There is a ABS polycarbonate blend that is extremely strong, but I really don't use it that much because if I need the strength, I'll go to nylon. PETG is still plenty strong enough for 90% of the things you do. If you're going to make like an electric motor mount for your RC plane, the thing that makes it strong or weakness isn't necessarily if it's ABS or PETG, it's which way the layers are printed. So think about this. The layers on this was printed from the bed up. So think about this like wood. If I were to take a chisel and get it in between these layers and hit it, I could split this thing right in half. But if I took the chisel and put it here, I'd take a sledgehammer to drive it through this because I'd be going across all those layers of ABS. So if you're making a motor mount and you're going to use the strength linearly down the way it's printed, it'll be strong. But if you're going to make the motor mount like this, that motor is just going to start peeling these layers away and it will break. So hopefully these tips you find interesting. And I absolutely love, and hopefully over here I've shown you some pictures of the stuff I've done, but I absolutely love what 3D printing has done for our hobby. So right here, believe it or not, is a Pratt & Whitney 9-cylinder with a 10-inch diameter, okay? All in this bag. And the really cool, and I'm just going to show you pictures. I'm not going to dig this out. But the absolute cool thing about this is I can print this entire motor in about, well, with both my machines running, in about 8 hours. I mean, people, that's unbelievable. You know, to do cylinders, this is something that I absolutely love about 3D printing. You print cylinders this way because the cooling fins, you know, if you print it like this, you're going to have something to support it. Oh, that's another thing I should touch base on. It just hit me. When you do and don't use support. So if you 3D printed a skull, you need something probably like to hold the upper jaw, hold things together. It's called support, as a 3D printing is building support up. Some people want to go the minimum support possible because they want to save ABS or filament. I don't. I use the maximum because sometimes as your nozzle is trying to bridge between things, it can get little sags. So experiment with the support that's in your slicer program. Okay, most of us experimenting people, don't get depressed if you ruin a print. Okay, just keep practicing. Make sure your temperatures are up, but just keep practicing. Make sure you use a glue stick. But what's really awesome about 3D printing is I print the 2-cylinder halves like this. Pull the cylinders out. Of course, I'm going to glue them together, and I'm going to talk about how to glue stuff together in a minute. And then you can actually print your gasket. So you put the gasket on there. You go to McMaster Car. Okay, there's my gasket. You go to McMaster Car and buy little nylon, either 256 or 440s. You can find little nylon bolts and nuts, and you cut off the head of the bolt, put it in your block as a stud, then you turn that bolt on it, that nut, so you've got the bolt with the head cut off, run into the hole, you've got the nut screws on there, and it looks just like a scale jug attached to the crankcase. So that's what I love the most about 3D printing is, you know, this I would normally paint black, but this I could actually leave orange as a gasket color, or I could paint it red as a gasket, or orange or whatever. But, and this little guy here is a Pratt & Whitney's 5.5-inch diameter radial engine. So look, people, absolutely love 3D printing. Keep your temperatures up, practice. One thing about glue sticks. Fill this bottle all the way up to here, buy this at Walmart, put about a 1/4 inch of rubbing alcohol in this, put about a 3-second squirt of Dawn dish detergent, mix it up. I put down glue every print. I've done testing though. You can get away with it with every 5 prints, but I don't trust it. So what I do in between each print is I will preheat my bed to 50°C. I'll squirt this water on. One really cool thing though, this is purple. Uh-oh, I'm gonna confuse you now. This is a purple covering and you don't want it. This is a blue, you do want it. But when you pop off the lid here, this is kind of a purple color, okay? So I don't want to confuse you. Purple container bad, blue container good, but the glue looks purple. The cool thing is when you put this on here and you 3D print on it and you pop it off and then you go to spray this water on it, all this turns purple and you see exactly where the glue is. It's really neat because you're remelting it with the water because it's water soluble. It's really cool. You can see exactly where the glue is left. But I will take a, you buy those red rags the whole back box of red rags you get at like Home Depot. And I just spray on my mixture. I wipe it clean. I put new glue stick on and do 3D printing. My testing shows 4 to 5 prints in between each glue application will work. I don't trust it because if I'm going to build a crankcase up that's 2.5 inches tall and it gets up to right where each piece, and let me try to explain that to you real quick. When you're printing the front of a crankcase, okay, hopefully that's not blurry, each one of these pieces are built up off the table first, and then they join at the top here. Well, these are susceptible to falling over. So you really want to make sure you've got your glue application on. So definitely if you're doing a crankcase, put the glue on every application. If you're doing some little bitty flat pieces, you might be able to get away with 3 or 4 prints or up to 5, but I just don't trust it. So, actually I can probably show you better in this one. Here we go. So this is the front of the crankcase on the 10-inch diameter. But as it starts printing, it prints this piece, this piece, this piece, and then as it builds up off the table, it joins right here. Well, right before it joins, as your nozzle's coming around, this ABS can curl up a little bit, and if it catches that, it pops this off the heated bed. The more glue you got down, the less acceptable that is to happen. Now you can build support up to each of these arches, which I do, but I'm just telling you, if you don't have good glue down when you're printing the front of a crankcase like this, it can pop off. So that's this video, everybody. I hope you find this informative. I hope it helps you. And, if you do build one of these, okay, you've got to reset how high your nozzle is off your bed because this whole thing is about 1 millimeter thick. So you need to rehome and restart over from the beginning your calibration, okay? Because if you don't calibrate and you just stick this on it, your nozzle by most chances are just going to run right into this and start, grinding into it. I did use a very, very thick PEI on this. The stuff that comes with most printers is literally as thin as cellophane. And if your nozzle hits it, it will tear it and it ruins it. I've actually ran my nozzle into this and basically drug a furrow in it, and it didn't really hurt it. Another thing is, if you will, about every 3 months, take a Brillo pad or a SOS pad and real lightly buff this down really thin. All those little bitty micro fissures, those little bitty cuts in it, helps your glue to stick. Don't polish these. I had a guy call me up one time and says, I can't get anything. I said, what do you clean it with? He says, well, I clean it with Pledge. And I said, wait a minute, what do you clean it with? He goes, well, I want it to be as shiny as it could so the parts could come off. I said, no, you don't want it shiny. You want it to be able to, basically if you had 1,000 grit sandpaper, or maybe 1,500, I think 1,000 might be too rough, but if you had like 1,500 or 2,000 grit sandpaper, which they do make it, if you've ever done body work, you can buy it. But the Brillo pad is what works the best for me. And gosh, guys, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. Maintenance on my machines, I virtually, knock on wood, I've had a couple of the plugs that go into my motherboard get hot and deteriorate. So I took the motherboard out and soldered in my own what I call main leads with a connector on it. So I've heavily modified this, but keep in mind, I think this is 27 kilometers. I don't know how many miles that is, like 10 miles or something. Or it's 29 kilometers. And this one I think is 22 or 23 kilometers. But that is a boatload of filament. And when you're buying them in these massive rolls like this, and this roll lasts me, I don't know, 3 weeks, that's a lot of filament. Now that's when I was making engines. Now a roll like this will last me 3 months. So that's it, everybody. And I hope you find this informative. And boy, I think I covered it all. I hope I did. But this is supposed to be a very basic, not getting into the molecular structure of ABS and all that crap. Rock on, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Be safe.